Hello, everyone. I'm Hector Del Castillo, and I'd like to welcome all of you to today's panel discussion. Today's topic is the State of Product Management 2021. And we have today 4 expert product management panelists who will be answering questions, and I will be moderating. I will be your moderator today. We are recording today's session, so we'll be sharing a link where you can watch the video playback after today's live session. But before we get started, before we get started with questions, I want to give the panelists, each and every panelist, I'm going to be calling out everybody by name from left to right and asking them to briefly introduce themselves so that before we can actually begin with the actual questions. And Steve, you're first.
Oh shoot! I was working on the chat stream. What am I doing? Introducing myself.
Who are you?
Who are you?
Okay. Apparently, I'm the delirious one on the call. Hi, I'm Steve Johnson. I'm with a consultancy called Untitled Consulting. I spent 15 years as an instructor for Pragmatic and have spent the last 10 years as a consultant. So it basically means I haven't done real work for about 25 years.
All right, welcome. Dan Olson, you're next.
Yeah, and Steve is one of the best storytellers I know. I remember going to his talks and it's being super entertaining. So, hi everybody, I'm Dan Olson. I'm a product management consultant and trainer. I'm the author of the Lean Product Playbook, and I also am the founder of the Lean Product Meetup, a community out here in Silicon Valley that we've taken online that's got over 10,000 members. So I'm really excited to be participating in ProductCamp. I'm really excited to see that they took it online. And I'm excited that I was invited to participate today. So thanks.
All right. Thank you, Dan. And Pamela, you're next.
Thank you. So Pamela Shore, and I'm in San Jose. You're somewhat near Dan. And I've been in product management for a lot of years. Let's just put it that way. Came out of the Apple grind, if you like, and then ended up at 280 Group developing content for training product managers, delivering the product management training, and co-wrote Product Management for Dummies. So I'm keenly interested in how people expand their careers and become better at product management and exactly what that takes. So I don't know about the other folks, but we all have to really think about this stuff, right? If you're doing it, you just have to do it. But trying to explain it to other people is a bit of a challenge. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Paul, because you're in the same boat, right?
That's right. Hi, everybody. My name is Paul Young, and I am currently an instructor with Pragmatic Institute for the last 10 years or so. Prior to that, 25-year career in product management and marketing across some really big companies like Cisco and Dell, also some startups with names you've probably never heard of. Some of which worked out and many of which didn't, here in Austin, Texas, where I live, holding down the middle of the country. I'm also the founder of ProductCamp Austin, which is, I know one of the participants in this new online version. And so 12 years ago, when we started ProductCamp Austin, we had no idea what it would become. And so super excited to participate in this and see, what Hector and Seth and the rest of the team are doing to really grow this out. So happy to be here.
All right. And myself, I'm Hector Del Castillo. I'm also a product management consultant, and I work with companies that need help in figuring out how to inspire their teams to actually start utilizing their product management superpowers to build better products faster. And if you are in the boat where you're looking for actually building teams that are more effective, reach out to me because we normally get involved with that. And I can say this is actually what everybody here in this panel has decades of experience, each one in product management. So it's a great discussion, and we're really looking forward to questions. And we have some questions that we have received from you. I want to thank all of you who have already submitted questions. We're going to start with some of these questions, and then I'm going to be asking panelists to contribute. And we're going to be spending a few minutes per question. And then at the end, we're going to be holding also a Q&A by the audience. So be sure to type in your questions via the chat, because we'll be monitoring that for additional questions once we begin Q&A. So let's get started with the first question. And the first question will actually be with Steve, and that is, how has the role of product management evolved over time? Tell us a little bit more about the evolution, the history of product management. And Steve will actually take the lead on this, and then we'll have somebody else contribute as well.
You're muted. I don't know.
Oh, once again, I'm just talking to myself in my little room. Thank you for that question. You know, my first job no, I'll do it this way. My first job out of college, I was a programmer, and I did that for a couple of years. And then my boss did the kindest thing. He said, you know, I think you would make a great sales engineer, and I want you to interview with a buddy of mine. And I'm like, is that because my work isn't good? And he's like, no, I just think you'd really enjoy the job. So again, a super kind thing. He recommended me to be a sales engineer. And my very first day as a sales engineer, we had user conference, and I sat next to the VP of product management on the plane. And she said, you know, in a way, we're kind of in the same business. You deal with customers one at a time, and product management deals with customers collectively. And that was a real, you know, key event in my life. And a few years later, I became a product manager. And in those days, it was very much a business role. And what I've seen over my 2.5 decades here of doing it is the pendulum swings from product management being more of a business role, swings over to being more of a technical role, sometimes swings over to being more of a sales support role. And right now, as a result of Agile, I think that a lot of product managers are not doing the jobs that their company needs them to do. I think they're really busy working on the technology, doing what I call reading aloud from Jira, without any real experience in the market. So how I've seen the job evolve is really from a business role, and then I saw it move to more of a sales support role. And right now, I think a lot of product managers are spending a lot of time in a very technical role without any market insights to speak of. And one more quick one. I know you said be short, but anyway, I was in San Jose Airport. I had visited a friend who lives there, and I'm sitting here, and the guy next to me was shuffling a bunch of index cards. And I looked at him and said, you know, wow, that is old school. Index cards. You know, are you grooming your backlog? And he said, oh yeah, actually I am. I've got I'm doing everything on paper because I really understand it. And I said, how are you doing it? And he said, well, this one just feels more like a gooder one than that one does. You know, he had no methodology to it at all. And I said, how many customers have you visited in the last 30 days? And he said, oh, none. I mean, I talked to the VPs, I talked to the salespeople, I talked to the developers, I talked to the support people, but he's completely absent market experience. And, you know, it's for years and years, you know, Paul and Pamela and Dan and I have been talking about the importance of first person interaction with customers. And that's the big fear I have for product managers today. If you're not talking to customers, then you're not capable of doing product management. But anyway, that turned dark there. So let me send it back to you, Hector, and you can go to a lighter person.
Well, actually, I want to ask you a question. What is the date when product management started?
I want to say 1942, 43.
Yep. Procter and Gamble was the first
1930s.
one to implement the role, and it was actually brand management at Procter and Gamble because they're a house of brands, right? Consumer products.
Indeed. It was it was May 13th, and I think 1942, when McAvoy wrote the memo about the need for brand managers.
That is correct. And if you think about those days, the entire US was coming out of the Great Depression, right? Procter & Gamble was one of these up-and-coming companies at the time that had done so much acquisition during the Great Depression that they found they had multiple brands within the same category, all consumer products selling in the same stores, and many of them were competing against each other. And this is how they came up with the role of brand management, which in Silicon Valley, in the old school, what I would call old school Silicon Valley, companies like Hewlett-Packard, Intel, and others implemented the same role as product management. And that's how it got started back in the 50s in technology companies. And it kind of has evolved. What I think is the history is that it's a role that has always evolved. It will always continue to evolve because it's the one role within the company that doesn't just embrace change. Product managers are leading change often within organizations. And if you think about that, if you're risk averse, or you're sort of like averse to any changes, which sometimes you may become that, it's not what the essence of product management is looking at. What is the positive changes that you can make within the organization that allow the entire organization to become better at what they do? And not only become better, but actually do it in a way that it's clearly you have a competitive edge over anyone that is in the same market. And that because of that, competition will try to copy, competitors will try to sort of like pursue each other. And product managers are the ones that are always keeping that moving target, making sure that whatever advantage you have, you're staying ahead of the competition. And that in itself implies that you're always looking at what is next. And whether it's about acquiring more customers, or whether it's about figuring out how to enter new markets, that's really the essence of product management. This is the reason why it becomes so complicated for most organizations. And we're going to talk more details, because the next question, we're going to be probing a little bit more into how product management is, and what are the trends as to where it's going in the near future. So thanks a lot for that information, Steve. Let's move on to the next question and give Pamela a chance to answer this question.
Yeah,
now is that we're actually looking at, everybody's speaking, and all the Fortune 100 companies right now that have product management staff are talking about increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion. My question is, why is that? What is the benefit to these large organizations in having this drive to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion within their workforce, but specifically within product management? So Pamela, I would like to ask you to take the lead on this one.
Great. And I would say this, that I think we're a very kind of white audience, or we're a white panel, so this is my perspective on it, right? And when I first started, I was an engineer, and the guys who worked in the drafting thing, they would take my hair, because I had long hair at the time. They would, and I'd put it in a ponytail, and they'd yank my ponytail. And at that point, I couldn't say anything.
Wow.
And my solution was I cut my hair. Right. So anyway, fast forward a few years, and I'm working as a product manager, and I'm now managing a group, and I had possibly the most diverse group at the time, of people with different backgrounds, different sides of political situations. Boy, I really had it all there. But what the interesting thing is, when you have diverse groups, you're able to do something a little bit better, because at the core of product management is synthesizing information. And you guys, Steve and Hector, you talked about being on the technical side, being on the business side, and swinging back and forth. And at all times, you're kind of making that call, which is more important, like right now. Okay, but I think there are other vectors in there, and I think some of that, by having diverse people in your group, you're going to be able to have a much broader sense of all the different perspectives, right? Before you make a decision, because you're so responsible for that synthesis, you better make sure that you're not just taking in, 5 people who all look the same, all think the same, all went to the same school. From their perspective, it's going to be like this. Diversity, equity, and inclusion means you incorporate more ideas, you incorporate more groups, and you have outreach into areas that you personally may have very little experience of. So that's my perspective on why it's so important, and why it's so important for product managers. Hector, what's your perspective on this?
Well, from my point of view, it's very simple. The more diversity you have in your workers, the broader the appeal of your product, the products you're managing. And if you don't do that, then you're missing out, because you would never know what you don't know, and you're trying to attract new types of customers, and they're just not buying because they don't really, from their point of view, you're not presenting your brand the right way, in the way that they would like to see a brand where they perceive a value. And it's not about the product, it's just about perception, right? And perception is everything when those are your buyers. And whether you're a B2B or a B2C vendor or both, it's you got to figure out as to what is the right way to present your brand to the right customers, and don't assume that all segments will care about the same things, because they don't. And often it's about really understanding upfront, having empathy and understanding that the customer journey for each different group of customers varies slightly different, and what they value, what they perceive as value, also varies. And if you don't have diversity within your product management team, you're going to be able to try all these things, but you're mostly going to be just shooting in the dark, almost experimenting until you get it right, and that might take some time. So if you include diversity of ideas and diversity of the where people are coming from, not just people with a technical background, but people that actually can empathize and really understand, what people are going through and what they think is their main problem, so that you can propose the right solution. I think that's really the whole secret and the whole issue of benefits.
Yeah.
Many of these companies that you're seeing right now that are driving this, right? Microsoft, Google, Facebook, even right now, they're basically looking at very slow growth here in North America, because our population is in a very slow growth rate. Where is the highest growth rate in the world occurring right now? It's even outside of China. It's not necessarily just China. It's the entire Asia Pacific region. It's set to grow at double-digit growth rates year to year for the next 10 years. This is where customers are going to be in the future. They're not necessarily going to be growing a lot more here. If the market is already saturated, where you operate or where you are headquartered, especially here in North America, you're going to have to figure out how to sell to Asia Pacific Islanders, because that's who's achieving the highest population growth rate, and also the highest growth rate in buying power, right?
Right.
All
and
of
then
this.
so sorry, I'm just going to say here that there's also one comment that came out, which is it allows you to address different things. So Steve writes, you avoid huge mistakes like water faucets that don't recognize black cans. Or one example I heard the other day was, it was a medical solution, but it assumed a man's body, like it had to be attached to a belt. Well, women don't have belts, right? Or it's unusual for us to even wear a belt. So how would you do that for a woman's body, right?
Yes.
So lots of reasons for this focus on diversifying inputs into what's going to go on with the next version of your products. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's move on to the next question. And the next question is, what are the most common challenges that you have seen within organizations that you work with that impact product management teams? And I would like to ask Dan to take a lead on this one.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, and it's interesting to see the chat conversation, and to pick off of what Steve said, and somebody shared, Marty Kagan's recent article as well. I think one of the biggest challenges is training. We've been very fortunate in our field. In the last 5 years, PM has become hot, y'all. It's like everybody wants to be a PM. Everybody does, right? Engineers, designers, QA, customer success, people graduating from college, people graduating from grad school, MBA. Everybody wants to get into PM. The secret's out how cool a job it is, and yet all these people are joining, and there's no training, right? They come in without any training, and so we've got a bad combination of huge demand and not much training. So it makes me think about, how should PMs build their skills? The best way is if you have a mentor, if your manager is strong at it and can mentor you. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Sometimes your manager's too busy, or they're not good at mentoring, or maybe they didn't get much training themselves. And so events like ProductCamp are a great way. That's part of the solution to doing that, reading books, looking at videos, reading blog posts, going to training workshops, whatever. But so anyway, I think there's that gap that you see with a lot of people. And to confound it more, one of the other big challenges I see is staffing levels, right? Not to oversimplify it, but a lot of the companies I talk to, the PMs will be complaining about things, and I'll be like, well, how many PMs do you have? How many engineers do you have? And I'll just calculate the ratio. Sometimes it's like 15 to 20 to 1. How can a poor PM possibly scale to handle the needs and to interact with 15 to 20 people? It just doesn't make any sense, right? So, ratios aren't the only way to diagnose that, but it's a pretty telltale sign. Ideally, you've got like a ratio more like 5 to 8 to 1 is a healthy range of ratios. And maybe if there's a lot of back end work, maybe 10 to 1. And look, we want to get better. If you're at 20 to 1, then getting to 10 to 1 is progress. Like, let's do that, right? And it can be impacted by a few things. One is the lack of QA. It's no longer, it used to be a given that you would have QA as part of your software team. Now it's like not so cool. It's not the flavor du jour. And what happens is hiring managers go, well, I have a approval for a headcount. I can hire one more engineer, or I can hire a QA person. And they always go for the engineers. Like one more, at some point, when you've got 50 engineers and 0 QA, the marginal value flips. You gotta So anyway, guess what? Like I like to say, good PMs, they abhor a vacuum, they fill a vacuum. There's no QA. Who's going to be doing the QA and the UAT? We all know it's going to fall on the PM shoulders. Mm-hmm. Likewise, UX design. A lot of organizations have underinvested or non-invested in UX design. Who's going to do the wireframes? Who's going to do the user research, right? It's going to fall on us. So that compounds it. The combination of like the not being staffed at ratios to make you set up for success, combined with the lack of training and the high demand, it's kind of like this unfortunate perfect storm where we have a lot of people struggling in their job because of that situation.
Thanks so much. Steve, can you chime in on this one?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've encountered this for years, and it's not really a new issue, but so many parts of the organization are understaffed or underskilled. And I think one of the difficulties is that in your role as a product manager, you often do indeed become a subject matter expert. And so it's like, hey, I need somebody to go on a sales call. Who's the best expert? I need somebody to fill in this void over here or over here or over here. We need somebody to staff the trade show. We need somebody to write this thing, on and on. And as I think we all mentioned Marty Kagan earlier. One of his great quotes is, most product managers are not doing the job that their company needs them to do, because they're so busy doing project management for others. They're doing dev lead for others. They're doing QA. They're doing design. And I've said for at least 15 years, the reason product managers do design is because they suck at it less than development.
Yeah.
That's marginal, Steve. That's really marginal. I've seen PMs draw.
They're willing to do it, right? That's I guess it's because they fill the gaps, because there are. Yeah. And that's what it comes down to. Like you said, the two dimensions, Steve, understaffed. And even if you're fully staffed, are they fully skilled? If the designer you're working with, doesn't have the UX design chops, and so like in an ideal world, you'd have fully staffed all the functions. Like I like to say, it takes a village. You'd have a fully staffed visual design, fully staffed interaction design, fully staffed front end dev, fully staffed back end dev, fully staffed UX research, right? And they'd all be like 10 out of 10 rock star on skills. That would be an amazing, but nobody's in that boat. They're either missing some of those roles, they're understaffed, or as you said, they're staffed, and then the other thing is they may be staffed, but then you get sliced, you get resources shared across different teams and things like that.
But Dan, here's what I find really interesting. Product leaders shoot themselves in the foot and exacerbate this problem. They need a reset at the executive level in terms of expectations for hiring and product. Because like I get pings from people in my network all the time. Can you help me find a product manager? I'm like, sure, send me your job description and what you're looking for. And they send me this job description that says, I want a product manager with 15 plus years experience in this industry, who can also write code, who also has their MBA, who also blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you realize that person doesn't exist. And if they do exist, they already have a job. And so, you're not going to ever fix the problem in hiring unless we get a little bit of a reality check and can accept that it's okay to bring in somebody else who maybe doesn't check all those boxes. And then through the tools that you provided, like mentoring and training and some of this other stuff, we can bring them up if they have the core values that make them good at the job. But we gotta start helping product people understand that their job is not to be the master generalist and be the universal Band-Aid that covers every gap in the organization. Like the thing that you were talking about, Steve, about how product managers hop on QA or design or whatever, totally true. But what ends up happening is they get just good enough at it to do what I call papering over the gap. They paper over the gap. And so if you look at the table and the gap is papered over, you don't see it. But when you actually put something heavy on it, it falls through. And so it's a pay me now or pay me later type problem. So it's like, you can pay me now by hiring somebody who actually knows how to do design, or you can pay later in the form of bugs, bad user experience, support calls, because you released something that the product manager designed without design skill sets. So it's like, what do we want to do?
Yeah, somebody
Totally.
in the chat said PM tends to be a junk drawer. And your comments made me think of it as like a Swiss Army knife. And it's like Swiss Army knife, when it has 4 or 5 or 6 things, it's pretty cool. But when it starts to have like 10, 20 tools, it suddenly becomes useless, right? You become
Totally. Well, the real question I think we have to ask, and for leaders sitting in on this, is how many departments are hiding their headcount in product management?
right.
Right.
Yeah. QA design.
Yep.
And for me in my past, the biggest one was sales engineering. Sales engineering is a critical role, and if you've been a sales engineer, you know how important it is. And yet, the industry average is there's 5 salespeople sharing one product manager. So that doesn't work. What salespeople tell me is they need a sales engineer at least half the time, which means the ratio should be 1 to 2. And if I can't find a product manager, I can't find a sales engineer, what am I going to do? I'm going to call a sales engineer, a product manager, and to be the sales engineer. And I got into this delightful argument with this guy who was like, I love to take product managers on sales calls because they're so good at it. And I said, they actually are very good at it. It's also not their job. He's like, yeah, but I always like to do it because they're so good at it. I'm like, yeah, but it's also not their job.
But
And
all he cares
if
about
they're
is
not
getting
doing their
closing
job,
the sale.
you're gonna pay for it later, right?
The opportunity
Yeah,
cost.
totally.
Yeah.
It's
And I said,
opportunity cost.
All he wants to do is close that sale, though. If that person helps him close the sale, it's like
Absolutely. You know who else is good on sales calls? The president of the company.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
There are a lot of people who are good on sales calls.
Yeah.
Let's be clear about this. This is not the fault of sales. They're acting the way that we want them to act, and they're advocating to win the deal they're trying to win. This is the fault of the product executive and the executive team for not recognizing the gap and allowing the product manager to get pulled. Most product managers are people pleasers, right? They're type A personalities. They see a job that needs to get done, and they hop on that grenade. And the problem is you want to say yes. I mean, I see product managers who want to say yes all the time, and I tell them you got to learn how to say no, and they're like, ooh, I don't like that.
Yeah, good point.
Well,
Because that's a job.
Paul, I'm gonna challenge you a little bit on that. I don't know that they're necessarily, the good ones are not necessarily people pleasers, but they are driven, and they do want to see their product succeed, and they will do whatever it takes. And if that means, like, I've been pulled out of a car at like 11 o'clock at night and told me, do not drive home because you won't make it, right? And that's because I wanted to tell everybody about my product, right? And it was like, no, you're staying here tonight because you are in no shape to drive. Right. So we're driven, but we can drive right off the cliff, right?
And we got to learn to say no. Because the other thing is, and I just got done on a coaching call with a product leader who's getting pulled into the weeds on all these things. And you're getting pulled this way. It's like silly putty. You're getting pulled by sales. You're stretched in that way. You're getting pulled by UX, pulled by QA. At some point, you as a PM need to draw the line and look at your gig. We were just talking about doing a calendar audit. Like, are you sitting on these random meetings? And so no can be tough. And so the softer version I like to emphasize is not now. Like, I just, not now. I just can't. Just not. And same thing for features. And we're not saying we're never going to build that feature. It's just not now, not in this version, right? So that's a softer way to say it.
Right. But it also goes back to what Paul was saying. The problem is not in sales. The problem is not in the product manager. It's in leadership. When we get a job description that describes what recruiters call a purple squirrel, this perfect non-existent candidate who will also work for peanuts, it's the leadership that needs to get realistic about, how many sales engineers do we need? Why don't we have a UX person on every team? How can we staff all of these positions instead of us saying, hey, product managers, just say no, because Steve said so.
Totally, man. Totally. Yeah. And I think that's part of the issue is, and I think it's changing, is typically CEOs of companies come from different backgrounds, like sales background, business, marketing, maybe engineering, but you're seeing more now that product management has been around longer and there's more of us, you see more product based CEOs, in which case that buy-in shouldn't be as big of an issue, but for most companies.
Let's move on to the next question. I want to thank everyone for contributing. Seems like there's many challenges for product management based on experiences, but let's move on to the next question. And the next question is, how did COVID-19 impact product managers and their teams within your organization or the clients that you're working with. And to take the lead on this one, I'd like to ask Paul to start with this one.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure that everyone on this session today has felt the impacts, over the last year plus, of COVID. Some of those are really obvious, like the fact that we're meeting on Zoom right now instead of in person. And collaboration between teams or amongst teams is getting different. We're relying more heavily than ever on tools like Slack and Zoom and so on. But I think another thing that I've really seen teams struggle with is, like, every week when I go and working with teams now, they say, well, I can't possibly listen to my market and do market research now because we're all remote. And I'm like, really? Like, I'm not sure I buy that. We can still do a lot of market research, and we can still even do that qualitative research where we're in front of a user. It just changes. In fact, there are certain things that you could do over Zoom that are actually easier than doing in person. Like, for example, for those of you doing like software type products, it's a lot easier to ask someone to share their screen on Zoom and actually like see their experience as they're experiencing it than it is to stand behind a user with your phone, going like this and trying to capture their experience like that. And so, like, I don't necessarily buy that everything is harder. I think there are certain things that might actually be easier. And then there's changes to your business model that product managers are having to think through. Some of those came up really unexpectedly. For Pragmatic, for example, I will tell you that a little over a year ago, in March of last year, we had something like 75 in-person training events happening all over the world. And by April, that number went to 0 and it all went online. And so that was like a huge shift to the delivery model that, we had to deal with. And I'm sure everybody has a similar story. Pamela, I'm sure you had one too. It's just really awkward now for me to like commute down my hallway when I was used to going down the jetway, every single week. I never thought I'd say this, but I can't wait to get back on an airplane. And neither can my wife. Wait for me to get back.
If you haven't been there and masked up and done it for like 6 hours, it kind of sucks, actually.
Yeah. No, I buy that. But I also think there's going to be a new normal that develops over the next, we don't know what it looks like yet, but it's coming. I think by the middle of next year, about this time next year, we're going to start seeing what that new normal looks like. You're already starting to see it with some teams saying, you know what, we're not coming back to the office. In fact, there is no physical office. We sold it. You look at a company like REI, they sold their big fancy new headquarters that they spent like $1 gazillion building. And they say, yeah, we're going all remote. Better for the environment anyways, and you can live wherever you want. And so I think that's going to create some challenges, when product management is in one city or maybe 5 different cities and their engineers are in another place and their POs are in another place and their project managers. It's just going to be crazy as we adapt to this new normal. And we're going to have to see how that works out. I don't have an answer to that one.
Yep.
But even before COVID, I was getting calls from people saying, I've got 13 product managers in 13 different cities, and the cost of travel is greater than the cost of the training. And so I was adopting this form of training about 5 years ago. And for some things, this is better. And so, I shudder to say what I'm going to say, but in some ways, COVID has opened us up. It hasn't all been terrible. It's opened up a lot of companies to the realization of what you just said, Paul. Like, why do we have an office? What we really need is we don't need cubicles. What we need is big work areas and whiteboards and conference rooms that are not permanently reserved by the VP of marketing. Places where we can work as teams, because it's ridiculous for me to drive an hour and a half to the corporate headquarters and sit in my room all day and then drive home when I have a better computer at home than I do at work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Greg put something in the chat that I want to comment on about how teams are still going to need to get together. And I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Something that I've seen several teams do. I was kind of surprised by this. Pragmatic did this. And now a couple of companies I've worked with did this. Like, we literally sold off our corporate headquarters. Like, we don't have a building now and everyone is 100% remote. But what we've done is we've taken some of that money that went towards the corporate headquarters and we're not just recapturing it, putting it to the bottom line. It's going towards regional get-togethers for the employees that are in different parts of the country. So over the next year, we're all getting together a couple of times
Brilliant.
to have that in-person experience again.
And it's cheaper. I mean, think about it. I mean, it's actually cheaper to do it that way.
Yes.
Which is kind
Totally.
of scary.
Totally.
Yeah. The people I feel the most for are the new employees though that join, because you don't get to meet everybody as much, right? So it's like, I think that people realize that. And so just like how you onboard people in a more mindful way in a remote environment is important. And then I do think what Paul was saying, like companies they're trying to do some kind of get-togethers before they can physically get together. They're just doing like happy hour Zoom things like this, or trying to maintain some of the social aspect of it, which can be tough.
Yep. Well, I think the real winners of the pandemic, when it comes to being a lot more overwhelming demand, I think Zoom is by far the largest leader. But the next one is Slack. If you track what Slack has done, Slack is now owned by Salesforce. It actually was the Salesforce's latest acquisition at the beginning of this year, and it's because along with Zoom, everybody has gone into adopting Slack to have this asynchronous way of gathering people from around the world, that even though they're not face to face, a combination of video conferences along with Slack for messaging offline and not email is what most people have migrated to. And this is, I think, supports what is going to be remaining for a little bit longer, which is the hybrid model, where some of us are going to still mostly, I would say probably the majority of our time is going to be working remotely, but sometime will be face-to-face with smaller teams. And I think that goes along with lean and agile as well, because as organizations are becoming more using actually both lean and agile at the same time, the hybrid model goes along with them. And these tools can be repurposed to actually allow product managers and their teams to be as efficient, maybe even more efficient than before.
But I think somebody put in there the chat. He says, "I'm a COVID hire and I'm feeling it even after a year." So it does take effort, right? And I think sometimes you have to inject more personality into it. I mean, I tell jokes. I show the latest thing I cooked. I'm pretty flexible about being very open. But if people aren't comfortable with that, it's really hard to kind of get your personality across and get that kind of level of casual interaction that you need.
That's the thing. When you're in an office, at least you can just walk by and like, "Hey, Pamela, what's going on?" and catch up or something. When you're on a Tetris Zoom day, everything's da 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 da. It's like you're just getting through all your stuff. It's like 95% work, 0 to 5% social, right? I mean, so it's just so I agree, like what you're saying, Pamela. Well, try to find ways. And somebody said, "Hey, it's never the same as in person." Yeah, it may not be as good. It's like the best we can do. At least make some time for social online.
I'm curious how
someone said they have a wife who's an extrovert, and that's true. Occasionally, I'll just find myself talking to random people in the grocery store. So yeah, there are sad outcomes here.
So I'm curious how the new normal is going to work out, because when we think about like agile lean, and we're going to layer on top of it this new remote dynamic and so on, like we have all these new queues to manage now, or at least we're managing queues that were fuller before. Like you have probably 1,700 different Slack threads going at the same time now, whereas before you maybe had fewer when you could do some of that face to face. And so it's kind of taken me back in the day I'm going to date myself with this. Back when I used to work at Cisco, I was there when they first handed out the original BlackBerries. And we called them crackberries because like that's what they felt like. And I will always remember that the first time I had one, I eventually turned it in after a while, but I would get random sort of like palpitations or vibrations that I would feel in my pocket from an email coming in. And then one day I was in a movie with my wife and I felt one, and I got up to go address the email. Until I got out in the lobby, I realized I didn't actually have it in my pocket. It was a phantom vibration. And I think that like those phantom vibrations of like the Slack thread that is like in the back of your mind at 11 p.m. as you're trying to fall asleep is going to be there for a lot of people as they adapt to this new normal. So like, how do we deal with that? It's going to be tough.
Yep.
Well, Slack in many ways is just like SharePoint. I mean, if it's not organized correctly, it's yet another place where documents go to die.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. I think that we as product managers, we need to be early adopters of these tools and figure out what are the best practices to make sure that they're used the right way. because there's no one solution, but at least, figure out, give some basic guidelines to people so that they can get more effective at using the tools that are available currently. And then at some point begin to optimize them a little bit more. But this is a great sort of like to the next question, great lead in to that, because I want to focus on understanding what are the most desirable skills and tools for product managers. And to actually lead this discussion, I'd like to ask Dan to take a crack at answering this question first.
Yeah, and it asks about skills and tools. We've covered tools a little bit, and I value skills a lot. So I'm going to focus on skills. And I think that the longer I work in product, like I think to simplify the number one skill kind of is just like being able to answer why. I think why is like the most important question, like defining objectives, like what are we doing, right? So many times, PMs at the bottom of the food chain, they get some story or they get something to build, and all they know is I got to build this thing, and they don't know why. Like, how does this tie into our KPIs or our business goals or the broader roadmap? So I think good PMs, always have a good answer, are able to identify why. I mean, they can change their mind, but they know why. They can tell people, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? And closely related to that is prioritization. There's, as we just talked about, like if you got too many Slack channels, you got to figure out which ones are worth your time. You got too many features, you got to figure out which ones are worth it, right? So you are prioritizing. We also just got done talking about how you're stretched thin. You don't have enough hours in the day. You have to prioritize your time. Prioritization is key. You're always in a resource constrained environment, whether it's time or people. And so being really comfortable with prioritizing, and I like to say ruthless prioritizing, not just, I remember the first time I saw an MRD, it had like 10 highs and 15 mediums and 10 lows. And I'm like, that's not helpful. Like, what is engineering code first, right? So it's like, let's do high one, high two, like rank order. Sure, we have to be flexible. You can change it on the fly, but at any point in time, you know what they are. And obviously it should be informed by data, the prioritization, right? So we talked a little bit about how as people get pulled more into the agile PO role, they have less time and less expectation to be actually talking to customers. And that firsthand customer contact is key to help you answer why and to help you prioritize, combined also with product analytics. And I think that's an exciting trend in product management. It's just the rise of product analytics. The tools are getting, to go to the tool side of the house, the tools are getting a lot better there. Tools like Heap and Amplitude, Mixpanel, Pendo. There's just a lot of tools to give you insight. So, but that's just data. So how you make sense of the data is clarifying why and prioritizing. So I like to focus on those two.
Great.
I guess,
Pamela,
for me, I guess I agree, and I like to have a full toolkit, if you like, right? And I think sometimes as product managers, I think some of for those of you who've been involved in training, some of it is literally introducing product managers to a broader tool set, right? Like, so you can start with your why, and then it's like, how do we get meaning out of this? And so then bringing in tools like different canvases and whatever it is, but you have to have sort of 10 or 15 tools and think, how can I use this, right? And you're talking to the person who used the back end of a screwdriver to hammer a screw in the other day. So, I don't necessarily always use the right tool, but at least I knew that I should have had a hammer. Let's just put it that way.
Another way, oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No. I thought you were done.
No, but I think it's important because who was talking about being a product leader? Is that you, Paul? I can't remember. Somebody kept talking about product leader. I think more and more we are leaders. And so we have to really understand why we're doing it and then lead people on a journey through it. And those people who are super effective know how to guide people through a process, through a sequence of discussions and reach an outcome. And you might not know the outcome, but you have to know how to hold that space. And if you don't, you lose people along the way, you lose your credibility, and you're out. No one's going to listen to you. And the dev's going to take over, and then God knows what you're going to get, because it's going to be whatever they like to do and whatever thing is going to be fun for them to code, not necessarily what you really need to get out the door.
Yeah, so it starts with why. You have a second good point, which is we're all informal leaders. Like that, like say, like the PM's motto is, with great responsibility comes no power. So you have to influence without authority, right? It's kind of like Spider-Man, but not quite as good. And so you're right. But so we need to figure out the why. And then there's a whole secondary factor of, okay, how do I explain the why to the rest of the team? How do I explain it to the dev in a way that makes sense to her? How do I explain it to the designer? And how do I motivate them? How do I rally the troops in the same direction once I figure out what that why direction is, right? And then the other thing you said about tools, somebody once said, oh, PM is really a large part of PM is frameworks. It's all about frameworks, whether it's Econo model or importance, right? And then someone's like, yeah, well, you need a framework to figure out when to use which framework. There's so many, it's kind of like the tools. You have a tool belt and you need to figure out, well, when do I use this tool? When do I use that tool? And that is one of the challenges.
So Dan, there's one other thing I wanted to add to that. So when we talk about being a leader, and we have some people here who said, yeah, I want to get into PM and everything else. And typically, I'm not going to say exclusively, but typically they're coming from a tech background. And the biggest issue they've got is they don't know how to manage a meeting. They don't know how to manage discussions, right? And I think if I would give one thing to everybody to read, it's that whole thing on psychological safety out of Google. There's, persuasion. There's all these things about how do you deal with people? Because if you can do that, the rest is kind of on top of that, right? But guiding people through a process is critical.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, Pamela, most of the time what I see is technical product managers tend to focus a lot on continuing to build hard skills. I think the product managers of the future in the next 5 to 10 years need to also build their soft skills, leadership, being able to apply critical thinking, and be able to understand that analysis will have to have a purpose. But the first thing is identifying what is the right problem to be solving and for whom, and does it make business sense if in order to come up with a proposed solution to that problem. These are all things that need to be done of understanding the why, because not only can it's because you can build it, just have the knowledge to build something with technology or technologies, but actually understand that ultimately it's got to have its business model and make sure that the business model fits the market. Yeah. And I think that's a lot about soft skills to really understand how to do customer discovery, how to manage problems, because you're going to find lots of problems. Not all of them are going to be worth solving, and you need to prioritize those based on your discussions with prospective customers. So it's
I would
skills.
Totally agree with that, because if you take the tools, there's like the technical tools of running Agile and Jira and all this other stuff. And then once you build that foundation, then you move on. The soft tools become even more important, and I think that as you move up in your career, it kind of flips and those soft tools become way more important.
Yes.
Soft skills.
We've all seen the product manager who has all the data, but can't put it together into a story. Mm-hmm. And as a result fails. Mm-hmm. And so the discussion, Pamela and Dan, that y'all were having around the why, I think is critically important. I had a product manager once that, I had hired because, like you said, Dan, the word got out. It was kind of a fun role. And he came to me once super frustrated after a meeting. And he's like, those darn engineers, they just don't do what I tell them to do. And I'm like, dude, you realize the title is product manager, not product dictator. It's a soft skill influence role. And so you got to figure out how to get people on your side and bring them with you on a journey, not tell them what to do. As an industry, I would say we do a decent job training product managers, not just pragmatic, but all over on the hard skills. But the softer side is an area for opportunity. And the good ones that are doing it well are picking it up on their own or through mentorship, not through formal programs. But it's something that we need to see more of in the future.
Yeah. It's interesting, because Paul, you and I both do training, right? And there's so many times when I got to the end and it was maybe less the content and a lot more kind of showing people how I thought about stuff. Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, and so there's so many times someone says, oh, I can just present your material. It's like, yeah, that's not happening. Right. Because it's the thought process behind it. And I think that's the craft bit of it. Right.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point, Pamela. It's a way of thinking. It's not, well, I forget who, I guess it was Pamela who made the point about, tools. There's a craft here that comes from experience and, as much as anything, philosophy. I can't do woodworking, even if I bought all the tools.
Right. Yep. And I think, sorry, discussion, I think skills are certainly upskilling for product managers is a lifelong process, especially if you intend to stay in product management, not only just get in, but remain in product management for a long time. I think continuous upskilling is critical for anyone who wants to remain in product management and move on up in the structure. And I think it's about building, emphasizing both building hard skills at the same time that you're also building your soft skills. That's what upskilling is all about. And let's move on to the next one, because I would like to allow each panelist to kind of chime in on their perspective as to what the future looks like in product management. So I'd like to ask Paul to lead this discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So always hard to be a futurist, right? Because like no sooner do you say something than 5 years down the road, somebody tweets your statement back at you and like, you dumbass. So I'll do the best I can. I put a little bit of thought into this beforehand about, what does the future look like? And as I sort of peer into my VR goggles of the future, I was thinking about four things. One of them is I think product management is going to move up the maturity curve. You think about where project management was 15 years ago. That's kind of where product is now, and it's going to continue to move up. In terms of recognition at the executive level, in terms of academic recognition, like we see product management programs at the MBA level that didn't exist, 10 or 15 years ago. We're also going to see kind of what Dan was talking about earlier about leaders, especially at the executive level and CEO level, that were grown from product management that we never saw before. And so that's going to be something, and it's an aspirational career. I think that, people are really going to start wanting to go into product management. Unlike, I like to joke right now, there's no such thing as a kindergartner who is saying, I want to be a product manager when I grow up. I think that is going to change pretty quickly over the next couple of years. Mm-hmm. We're going to get better tools, but that's not going to happen overnight. There's a lot of development that's happening there. I think we covered that ground. I also think, and I had somebody in my breakout room, Scott, maybe that we're going to see the rise of product marketing over the next 10 years in a way that we haven't even seen today. So product management has gotten pulled ever more down to the technical and the tactical. And the PO thing is really like driving a lot of that, right? Combining PM and PO and pulling that more to the technical. And it's left a vacuum in the strategic side that product marketing, I think, is going to start moving into. And so I think we're going to start seeing more of that if product management continues to get pulled down to the tactical. And then the last thing, I had wanted to think about was the rise of a new role that I'm starting to see more of called product ops or product operations. Mm-hmm. Seeing this more and more in many organizations, but somebody who can serve as like clearing the aircraft carrier decks so that the product teams can do their roles more effectively, whether that's scheduling market visits, whether that's gathering the right metrics to make better decisions and the BI dashboard and all that stuff. I think we're going to see more of that.
Great. Thank you so much. And Steve, what about you?
Well, gosh, I in a surprising turn of events, I find myself agreeing with almost everything Paul said, which I don't believe has ever happened before. But yeah, I'm seeing more and more folks embracing this idea of product ops, which is, as much as anything, onboarding new people so they've got the tools they need to be effective. What are the tools we use here? Where are the data that you need to make decisions? What methodologies do we use here? And furthermore, I agree very much with Paul about product marketing. I mean, it's been a real sore spot for me that I've seen so many product managers become product owners, and product marketing has said, we can't do our job of go to market if we don't understand the market and the problems and the positioning and the strategy. So if the geeks won't do it, I guess we will. And so I'm seeing lots of companies where the VP of product marketing is determining product strategy. And I think that's a very big change.
All right. And Dan, what about you?
I think, I'm excited to see the importance and awareness of PM grow in the last 5 years. I think that trend's going to continue. Mark Andreessen famously said a long time ago, software is eating the world. It took the software world a while to realize, and if you want it to be successful software, you need a PM. You need PMs, basically. I think everybody realizes that now. They've been kind of banging rocks together without PMs, and they realize this isn't working out. And the bar is raising. The competitive bar is raising. If every other company or most of the other competitors have good PM and you don't, you're going to see it in the marketplace, right?
Yes.
So I think that's going to keep going. I think we'll still have this training gap. Unfortunately, it is what it is. I think we'll continue to have better tools and more data. That's just a trend that's going to keep going. And all the more reason that the synthesizing skills are going to be important, right? You're going to have so much data, you have to make sense of it. One prediction I'll make, this is kind of predicting, is we talked about, all the different things that PMs have to do well. And in general, as the role becomes more complex, I see this happen in other fields. We could potentially become more specialized. Like you're starting to see this a little bit like growth PMs versus plain vanilla PMs, machine learning PMs. Like, we all know there's certain companies that say, oh, you have to have a CS degree or EE degree to be a PM. We all know you don't really, but maybe if it's your ML PM, maybe you need to have those kind of skills a little bit more, right? So you're seeing as AI and ML, and I'm not talking about subject matter expertise, but like more functional expertise. And then perhaps also like more on the UX front end, people that are more front end UX more savvy there. Maybe they'll gravitate towards those. We have more front end PMs versus back end ML PMs versus growth PMs. Just a thought that you might start seeing more specialization over time.
Great. Thank you so much. And Pamela, what about you?
Yeah, I guess for me, I'm kind of taken by the idea that probably, 10, 15 years ago, Google Analytics came out and we were like, yeah, what a cool idea. And it just transformed marketing, right? Mm-hmm. And so about a year ago, I was working on a project, which was kind of like understanding Amplitude's products. And I was like, this has the capability of transforming product management. In other words, if we thought we were going to get away with using a few lighthearted tools, we're not going to be able to do that anymore. We are going to have to get to grips with understanding the detailed data that's coming out and making sense of it. So it's synthesis in spades. So that's a big trend I'm watching out for. And I think 10 years from now, you won't get to be a PM unless you have some ability to understand data. And yeah. Big trend. I think, Dan, you were talking about it earlier. It's just coming. I think the other thing that worries me a little bit is we've always talked about having domain expertise. And I see there being huge conflicts with people who are in what we would say today is more traditional product management. For example, I remember working with a company that did like pumps that were the size of your house, right? Like, and you think, well, how could analytics impact this person? Well, guess what? It's coming, right? Like digital transformation is coming. It's this huge train and some people are already through it. Some people understand it. There are so many PMs who haven't a clue that it's going to hit them, and it will. Mm-hmm. It will. So big changes. I would say the next 2 or 3 years, and it's going to hit us all.
Sounds great. Now, I'm actually wondering, none of the panelists, none of you mentioned anything about product-led growth. Is that going to be
that's product-led growth? When you talk about the analytics that are built into products, that is product-led growth. So fundamentally doing what happened to marketing, it's happening to your products, because as more and more go online, you have the ability to reach in, grab more data. Mm-hmm. Product-led growth. Absolutely.
But don't you think this is yet another attempt by developers to eradicate salespeople?
I'm not sure. I think it really depends. I actually saw some data from someone I know, and they were doing a lot of analytics. They had there was Pendo, by the way. Mm-hmm. And what they knew was they could compare where they actually had a salesperson involved and where they didn't, and the results were very markedly different. So I don't think it's sales gets erased. I think their role transforms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the role will change.
To what? Customer success?
Yeah, maybe the names change.
Well,
I think,
or they get to move up market. Like they get to move and be more strategic. Maybe, I don't know.
One would hope. I mean, one thing we didn't talk about. I mean, analytics is. I agree. That's going to be huge, but. Like when nobody mentioned, like I talked to a lot of AI, ML type people who are like, yeah, I can replace pretty much any decision-making role today. None of us talked about product management getting replaced by AI. I
think we've got good job security.
I think that's pretty tough, but
you just got that soft skill. We just got to talk about synthesis, soft skills, like,
yeah. Of course,
By the way,
somebody's
my
gonna tweet at
son, my
me.
son is going into AI, and I can tell you right now he has zero people skills, but he's 24, right? It's different, but
Yeah.
maybe he'll grow some.
I'm
You
sure
can design
somebody's
an
gonna get
AI
this
interface
recording
that
in
has
5
people.
years and tweet it at us and say, we showed you.
We'll all be replaced by AI panelists, guys. We don't need us anymore either.
Exactly.
Indeed.
We're getting lots of comments on this one.
Yep.
PLG, you down with PLG?
Yeah,
You know me.
It's a buzzword. I'm just saying, learn it because you're going to need it,
Yeah.
even if you're going to have to tell people don't use it. You need to know what it is. So.
Yeah, to me, it makes more sense when you're saying, you're now enabling, observation of whatever your customers are doing. So you're not just guessing as to what the actual journey is for them. You're actually measuring, and this is not about sales transaction. It's just about, saying how many unique visitors we have and how many of those are repeat visitors, and why do we have those repeat visitors coming into either our mobile app or our web app. They're not buying anything, but at least you know that they have a reason, and saying what content are they really looking for? What is the number one interest, and how are those trends changing over time to continue getting them to come back until they're ready to buy whatever you're offering.
The attrition rates are horrible. The
Yes.
drop-off rates are just astounding.
Yes.
Right? When you look at these graphs. So yeah, you have to really, I think the other thing that's really fun about ideas like product-led growth is it really starts changing what we think about personas, because we've always used numbers that or attributes that we can find, right? Now with product-led growth, you don't have an attribute, you have what are people doing? You're segmenting by behavior. So it's really different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And I think it goes beyond, just to defend PLG, it goes beyond basic insights. Like you can actually grow the business. You can get your customer to, up level, upgrades and higher levels, get them to use your product more, get them to share with other people. I mean, Atlassian is kind of like the poster child for this, right? Their ratio of sales as a percentage of revenue or people is like really, really low. So it's not a perfect fit for every business or industry, but I think that it's too easy to say, oh, we just need to have an army of salespeople. And the reality is some of that, there's a value you can get of PLG, and it's not an either or. You're still going to need salespeople for the high consultative sales and the high end of the market and things like that. So
right, but it is interesting to jump on your point of Atlassian. I mean, they started product-led growth from the very beginning, and I don't know when that was. I mean, what was that, 2000? So it's not like it's a new idea. It's just been one that perhaps we've been slow to adopt. But what a brilliant technique! It's like, here's a tool for a developer to use. And before you know it, 17 developers are all using the same tool, and they don't have a common database. And the VP goes, hey, why don't we buy a site license to this thing? And no salesperson was involved. But more than ignore the salesperson rant. The real point is they built a product that people really needed. It solved a real problem for them, and she told two friends, and she told two friends, and she told two friends,
so on.
Well, I think the other thing that happened is the tools became a lot easier to use, right? I mean that's and that was why Google Analytics started the whole trends.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they're just much better tools.
Fair enough.
And I think that that's what I'm seeing right now is that most people trying to catch up, that there are 21st century tools available for product managers. The adoption rate, I think, is lower, not because product managers aren't early adopters. I think the decision makers within organizations are the laggards. They're the ones that, they resist new tools because, they're just want to continue business as usual. And then, getting people to work harder, not smarter. And I think it goes back to what we talked about. One of the challenges for product managers is the fact that they really just don't get much attention from executives who should ensure that not only are they using the best practices, but they're using the best tools available for what they do, so that they can actually focus on their attention on the really hard stuff that requires a lot of critical thinking. And I think that sometimes, that I think it's going to change eventually, because I think the 21st century tools, what I'm seeing right now, this emergence of specific tools for product managers that are 21st century tools is rising. And I think that it's only a matter of time before we start getting more and more adoption, even within laggard organizations.
And you know
One
what?
thing you see,
The difference is so stark. Those companies where the execs aren't paying attention. And by the way, I work with the one woman, she says, I'm leaving because I can't get these guys. They can't even get agile right? And they can't even listen to their customers correctly. Those companies are going out of business because the people who adopt it, they're going to win every single time.
Mhm.
Dan, is that what you were going to say?
no, what I was going to say is it's an interesting aspect of this is like engineering has a budget. Like who pays the Jira bills, the Atlassian bills? It comes out of the CTO's budget. Marketing, Salesforce, for the longest time, the leader didn't have a budget for tools. And so I'm glad to see that that's starting to change. But the number of times I've been in there, talking to someone's like, well, I got to go talk to CFO to figure out where we can get the budget for product board or heap or whatever. It's just, it's kind of funny. And so you're seeing, back to your point, Pamela, there's the haves and the have not, the teams that get it, and they're giving the product departments a budget to up level their tools. Like, they don't even think about it. For dev, oh, they want the next flavor of GitLab or whatever. Okay, great. Oh, sales, they need this gizmo to see when people open their emails. Great. You want this SaaS tool? It's just like the checkbook's open for tools for those other departments. And so you're seeing it start to open for PM, which is good.
Well,
as the tools evolve.
And I'm starting to see that with my customers who have finally, or at least they say, they finally finished their agile transformation. They can build products correctly now, but now they're realizing they're building the wrong products. And they're like, well, what are we going to do about that? And I'm like, sounds like you need a product management transformation.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
But a lot of the companies I'm dealing with are going from like project to product, and it's like a whole new mindset. Except one thing I've learned about transformation is it has to happen from above. I mean, so many companies are like, hey, we need to transform, we need to go agile. Let's get developers to go take Scrum class. We need to transform to product-led growth. Let's send 4 of our 16 product managers to a pragmatic class. It's like, no, the problem is not the people that you're asking to change. The problem is the people who are requesting the change, because the leadership is still saying, God spoke to me in a dream and I need you to build me this feature.
Yep.
Yeah, or the shower. I had a great idea in the shower. We got to change everything. And as I like to say, it's amazing. Like, they'll do the agile transformation and still have a waterfall roadmap. It's amazing how many features ship on March 31st, right? It's just a magical day. Everything ships on March 31st, October 31st.
That's the same day that all the Salesforce stuff gets updated.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So something that we're going to see interesting with the analytics piece is, when you think about PLG and all these great analytics, I still work with teams that are just now instrumenting their products to gather analytics to this day. But we're going to see something else develop, which I refer to it as, like, shorthand is the curse of the available. So it's like, we have this available data represented in our analytics, and that's really cool. So let's use it. And then we kind of like see product managers going heads down into this like wonderful new data set. But then it's like, well, wait a second. That data set represents those that are interacting with the tool today. It doesn't tell us anything about those that aren't interacting with the tool, or at least not very much. And so, like, it's now going to create this huge blind spot where, like, people are like, I need to optimize my acquisition funnel by 5%. Well, okay, what if we were to optimize it by 2000% by solving a different problem that's out there in the market that our existing user base isn't telling us about? And so I think that getting that data and instrumentation and analytics out of the product to optimize pieces of the funnel are going to be really great. Even greater if we can solve problems that matter even more out there in the market.
Yep. So we're actually now in the Q&A process, and I do want to do a time check because we officially we're supposed to be wrapping up like at 6:30. It's already 6:41. I do want to spend at least a few minutes as some of the questions that I'm seeing on the chat from the audience. And one of the questions that I see here that somebody's asking to expand more about the role of product management in customer success. Where is that going in the next few years? And I don't know if anybody in the panel wants to take the lead on this one.
Okay, I'm gonna start here and say that the people who interact with customers, customer success, customer support, sales engineering, like, I've hired those people in the product management roles, and they're good hires, right? Like they have a huge amount of customer empathy. They know the domain, and then you can add the PM skills, you can wrap it around, and it works pretty well. So I view those folks as being kind of sources for problems for me, right? Like the next thing to fix. I don't know what everybody else thinks, but that's my simple.
I think they could make great hires. I agree with that. I've hired some people out of there. The question that I heard, Hector, tell me if I got this right, is what's the role of product into
product management in customer success, in ensuring there's customer success?
So I'll riff on something that Steve was talking about earlier. We have this concept of N equals one versus N equals many. And I think of, customer success as kind of like an N equals one type role. They're dealing with the person that's right in front of their face and trying to make that role super happy. Whereas I think of product as more of an N equals many type role. What are the tools? What are the templates? What are the artifacts that we need to put in place to make the success team as a whole be able to service all the people they need to go service? So it's almost like a force multiplier type effect. So a good product manager shouldn't see themselves as like the escalation point for customer success, but rather, how do I enable the customer success team as a whole, and what do we need to give them to be successful?
Yeah, actually, one of the things that I meant to say, I think when you think about customer, you think about like one account, right? Or a key account or a handful of key accounts, which are really one-offs. That's not really what I would consider is a product. One product for many groups of customers, because you can be selling into a market and you're selling into not one group, but multiple groups of customers in the same market. So I think that customer success is really about understanding who are those customer segments that are valuing your product today, and where are those other ones that are in the same market that aren't buying your product, and how do you get their attention to start buying your product? So it's really about understanding how to segment the market and understand that any large market can be segmented and that there are groups of customers, and each one of those groups behaves slightly different. They might have the same need, but may have slightly different use cases, different applications, and you need to convince them that this product is for them. And I think it's all about understanding, empathizing, and understanding that these are all different groups of customers, and that you need to figure out how to position your product the right way in order to get a rise in at least awareness, so that they can now start really considering your product for a future sale. And that is the beginning of just being able to acquire new customers in the same market. And I think that going back to what I forget who it was that brought up that the need for more product marketing, that is typically what is considered a product marketing role. Understanding how to segment the market and understanding how to differentiate one group of customers from a different group of customers that when they're all in the same market. And I think that that's going to be the strength, that the only way to succeed in doing that is for people to become more savvy about how to do segmentation of the markets and divide your market into groups of customers, understanding their needs, their applications, and how they perceive value, because they will all be different, even though they may be in the same market. I wasn't really sure if anybody wants to pitch in on that one, but I think that's really what the key is connecting that. It's really about talking about customer segments that are in the same market and understanding how do they perceive value, so you can present your product the right way.
Well, let me throw a turd in the punch bowl.
Yes, by all means.
I have completely reversed this. I have started with personas, and then I work my way to markets, to market segments, and then I work my way to markets. What I find is there are similar people, irrespective of their demographics. There are people who like Downton Abbey that have no other commonality, but they love Downton Abbey. Or there are people like everyone I know who love Star Wars, and there's nothing else we have in common except that we don't like going outside. I mean, there's
yeah, Dan's got the mug.
So I have found that customer success tends to focus on existing customers. And I think Paul made a really strong point. If we are engaging in the whole market, not just existing customers and the last 3 people we sold to, we may see a huge opportunity because we truly understand problems in the market, as opposed to listening to feature of the day requests from 3 stakeholders and our biggest customer. I look at, I get everybody to say, who is the, well, yeah, I'm sorry, one more little rant here. And that is, I see so many product managers and product owners who are oblivious to customers at all. They're only listening to their stakeholders. The stakeholder says, I want you to build me one of these things. And they say, yes, sir, 3 bags full, and I think that Pragmatic talks a lot, and I'm sure 280 talks a lot. And maybe Dan, in your book, you talked about the untapped market, that's the big part. That's the blue ocean. And it seems like most product managers, if they're doing anything in the market, they're talking to existing customers, which I would say talking to existing customers is primarily customer success and not product management.
And I would build on Hector. I agree with what you're saying about market segmentation. I actually find fewer companies are doing a good job at that than before. I feel like the awareness of the importance of that was higher before, when you kind of had better marketing and product management, I don't know, for lack of a better term, like integration. Like when I was at Intuit, we had really good, sophisticated segmentation. And so I would welcome it, whether it's product marketing doing it or product management doing it. As long as somebody's doing it, I don't want to argue who's doing it, but like I feel like, yeah, maybe that's part of it. Is I think that people just don't have the tools or the awareness to do it, so they end up only focusing on their existing customers. But the number of, I interact with a lot of companies, a lot of product teams. The number that have a somewhat sophisticated, or let's not even say it, like a decent description of their market segmentation is really low, right? It's really low, and so
come on,
another
Dan.
skill gap.
Our product is great for everybody.
Yeah,
everybody should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The broader the target market, the bigger the TAM. Come on.
That's right.
I think going back to what Steve was saying, where he starts with the persona and then into customer. I think it's like chicken in the egg thing when you're actually using personas, because everybody knows personas from using agile or some sort of lean agile process. And that's where they start, because that's where they're taught. Very few people are connecting that each group has a slightly different persona. And if you're a B2B, you need multiple personas for one sale. You've got the decision makers, you got the influencers, and then you got the actual users and the buyers, all in that one organization. And if it's one group of customers, those personas will behave different than a different organization that represents a different group, same needs. And you need to present your product the right way in order for them to see the value. And that's really what I'm talking about, is that you're still using personas, but now the concept becomes a little bit more where you're saying, we don't just need one set of personas, we need multiple sets of personas, because there are personas in each group that behave differently. And even better, they have different buying power, which means that if you actually are able to create a product line, and then you're pricing it for that segment based on what is their buying power, and you're not making it the same price for everyone, for the entire market. That is the biggest mistake that you can do as a product manager, is price your product the same for the entire market. You're missing out on where you can actually convert your product to become more profitable just by differentiating clearly.
We took a big left turn here on pricing. Do we really want to go there?
No, let's not start down pricing. We'll never get out of here. And then we'll talk about SaaS pricing. And oh my God.
The sad thing is, I agree.
How late are we going to be?
Yeah, the number of agile teams using personas is less than 10%. So sad, we're up here, the pie in the sky, talking about market segmentation. We're acting like everybody has personas. Like the average PO is like, hey, I write my tickets in Jira, I story point them, I do the stand-ups, I do my sprint planning.
And
that's what I do.
Yeah.
Persona is user.
Right? Yes, exactly. Yes.
I had a group today I was working with, and we got to a certain point. I said, so in fact, when we're talking about this, we just don't have one group you're working with, right? You have 3. I said, oh, wow. And I thought, okay, right. We're dealing with real, marketing experts here. Luckily, it was a really dev kind of focus group, but yeah.
Right. But
They
it is so
Right.
funny. When I introduce personas to product teams, they say, "Oh, no, that's a marketing thing."
Right.
And
I
then
know.
Oh,
and
yeah.
then I introduce
yeah.
personas to marketing, and they go, "No, that's a development thing." And it's just like,
Yeah.
does anybody care who we're building and selling to? That's, and they're like, well, users and buyers. I'm like, those are not valid conversations. As a user, I want the feature I want so I can have the feature I want.
Right.
So I found that
Very circular thinking. Anyway.
I found that the crowbar to pry open that discussion on user personas is design.
Yep.
Agreed.
Design cares a lot.
Ah,
Design cares a lot about the user, and they
they're good.
have
They do.
They're good.
personas in their toolbox already. They're probably already building them. And so if
And-
we want to get broader adoption, they're a great partner for that.
And good
All
marketing.
right, Hector,
do the
man,
same.
if you're not careful, we're going to be here all night.
I
How
know.
do you want us to
So-
kind of wrap this up for you?
I want to just make sure I want to thank all of you as panelists for a great discussion, and also the audience for being attentive and typing in so many comments and questions. Thank you so much. And we are once again, we are going to be making this entire discussion available via the post the live event. We have been recording it, and here is how you can contact us. You can either follow us on LinkedIn or connect with us on LinkedIn or follow us on Twitter. Here are our Twitter handles and our the URLs to our LinkedIn profiles. Feel free to reach out, and we're looking forward to seeing you all day tomorrow throughout the breakout sessions, and also on Saturday as part of Product Camp Online. The entire agenda is already published, so be sure to take a look at that. And we are going to be having a closing panel discussion on Saturday at 12 noon. We'll send out information about that because you can actually, it'll be something similar. We have different panelists and we have a different topic. We'll be talking about the trends and predictions for product management. So I want to, again, thank the panelists, thank all of you that in the audience for sticking with us. And we'll be seeing you in the next couple of days. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Hector.
Long.
Thanks, everybody. Take
Thanks.
care.